Good morning, gentlemen. Wonderful time. And I am now in front of my special room with the horses behind me. And I believe the horses are looking a little angry. Well, that's part of the game because such a few things have happened in the world, which I am going to talk to you about now. As I told you earlier, I do not give the news. I'm going to analyze the events in the White House which took place between Zelensky and Donald Trump, and also the actions of the British Prime Minister and his attempt to bolster up the European alliance. One thing is very clear, that the European alliance, that the EU and Zelensky do not want peace in Ukraine. That is the first thing. They have a reason to continue the war, and the reason is the massive flow of funds into Ukraine which go into the pockets of the politicians. I think there needs to be an inquiry, gentlemen, about this, but I'm not the man to say it. Secondly, they have been fighting this war piggyback on the American support. This is also very sad and shows how foolish the Americans have been all throughout. Whether they were foolish or whether they were having a devious plan, I don't know, because right from Obama to our good friend Biden, they let the American taxpayer down by paying billions of dollars into Ukraine, and the Americans have no chance of getting their money back. So Donald Trump had said in his very first address that I will have peace in Ukraine, and he's very right. The other day I heard his speech, a very fighting speech, in which he had said that he didn't want unnecessary killing of soldiers, and that is very nice. He's the first American president who has come up with the view that we must save lives and not fight wars. Unfortunately, the European alliance, led by Macron and the British Prime Minister, do not believe in it. And as you see, there was a meeting held right after the fiasco in the White House when Zelensky insulted Donald Trump, and Britain has given $2.8 billion loan for weapons to Ukraine. Now, there is a mystery behind all this. And the question now is how much of spunk Donald Trump has got. He can finish the antics of the British Prime Minister and the French President in no time, I can tell you. If he freezes completely all aid to Ukraine and the EU, and at the same time he stops the supply of weapons, just to do this, and within 15 days, Ukraine will collapse. Because the British, despite all the bravado, cannot fight the Russians alone. Let's be very clear about it. They just cannot fight the Russians alone. So, that being the case, the question arises, what is next? Now, Elon Musk is one man who is now having a big say in the American policy, and he's come out with two statements that Europe has been living off the funds of the Americans, spending less than 1% on their defense, and the net result of that has been a very good life for the people, free medical, free pensions, and the people are generally well off. And it's all on the American taxpayer because 70% of the defense of the funds for NATO are also coming from the United States. Sometimes I wonder, how could the Americans be so foolish? In fact, if you remember the Hindu god Kuber, his coffers were also finished at one stage. And the same thing could happen to America. And Donald Trump has realized it and he wants to put a stop to it. Now the question is, Elon Musk, as I'm telling you, he's got a big say. He said two things. And one is that the European Union, America must put equal tariffs on it, number one. Number two, and that I feel is more important, he said we should withdraw from NATO. Now that is the crucial point which comes in. And my point is, does Donald Trump have the spunk to do this? It's very easy to bark and very difficult to bite. That is what really matters. And whether he can bite the bullet. Because in my view, whether the Americans withdraw from NATO or don't withdraw, NATO is a dead organization, a paper tiger, and finished. NATO was only a threat, a Damocles sword. You know what's a Damocles sword? Which is hanging by a hair over the head of the king. And so this was a Damocles sword hanging over the heads of the enemies of the EU. But the fact is, I don't think this sword could have hit the enemies, it would have hit the British and the French themselves. Why? Because they don't have the military power to sustain or battle Russia on their own. The British got an army of 80,000, and even if they suffer 20,000 casualties, that's the end of the war. Another thing we must bear in mind is that the Western powers, particularly say England and France, who are the biggest champions to fight against the Russians still, are going to be very, very hard pressed. In fact, they are playing with fire. जिसको कहते हैं ना आग से खेल रहे हैं. And the net result is playing with fire means burning yourself, and that means if there's a nuclear war, Russia will survive. I can tell you definitely because of its massive size. But what about England and France and the smaller countries? So the good news is that the smaller countries, particularly like Poland and Hungary, do not want to be part of this alliance to fight in Ukraine. They said, no, sir, we are not going to do it. And there are many more countries of this view. I'm sure Finland and Sweden are not going to go and fight in Ukraine. And the Germans have also are very reluctant to put troops on the ground. But the British Prime Minister is thinking he's a great hero. I mean, I know what sort of hero he is. He said he'll put boots on the ground. And Donald Trump made a very important point. He said, can you fight Russia on your own, all alone? Now that is a crucial point. And if they can't fight Russia, it's about time that the Donald Trump put the screwdriver into the British and the French and wait and see how long these people can fight in Ukraine. So my view, gentlemen, is that NATO is finished, number one. And number two, I think England and France have signed their death warrant. If not today, tomorrow the Americans will realize that giving money to these two behemoths has got no meaning because they are just paper tigers who can talk and talk and talk and look like, those mean characters we see in the comics, like the Joker or the Batman. They're the characters that remind me of that. And Macron's got a similar face, I think. And he also doesn't know what the hell is happening. And these countries think they are very big. Macron said he'll give a nuclear cover. What sort of nuclear cover he can give to the European countries? Tomorrow there's a nuclear strike. I think the small countries like Holland, Belgium, Denmark, they cease to exist. And let's not forget of the famous statement made by Nikita Khrushchev, on which he had said once that to England, that all I need is 5 thermonuclear H bombs and England will cease to exist on the world map. I think at that time Harold Macmillan was the British Prime Minister. He was greatly perturbed until he was assured by Eisenhower, don't worry, we stand by you. So Americans have been standing by all this time, but the net result of all this is, as you can see, a very, very dangerous position has come in. Europe is on the brink of World War III, and Donald Trump is right. This war in Ukraine must be stopped. I think it will be stopped, that's my view, because the Americans are not going to give any funds further or weapons to the Ukrainians. And if they do it, I think the Americans would sign the death of their own economy. I hope they are wise enough that they don't do such a thing. So Europe is almost finished. The EU is over. And there's a big demographic problem there. Young men are not available. And with the interest of the British is not to keep talking of fighting in Ukraine and putting boots on the ground, because the days when they won in India are over. Gentlemen, I hope you are liking this video of mine. Please, I request you share it with your friends and come back for more. I look forward to further interaction with you, and I will be very, very happy if you could subscribe to my channel. Well, gentlemen, as I've already said, the Ukraine war is on its last legs, one way or the other. Either it will lead to a nuclear war or a Russian victory in the conventional sense. We'll have to just wait and see how it happens. And if Donald Trump plays his cards right, he could well become the greatest leader in Western history, a man who would be the greatest president of all time. Well, gentlemen, we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. I really don't know. I'm not a crystal gazer, but the situation is extremely grim. And sitting in India, we can't really understand what's happening there. Modi, of course, also doesn't know what's happening, and he's been playing hardball. And as I said earlier, he's been sitting on the fence, and he's been sitting on the fence in the Ukraine war. So it's about time he decided his options. He's with the Russians and the Americans, or he's going to be with the EU. The EU, gentlemen, I feel very sad when I bring this point to you, is also on its last legs. All their economy, their socialist economy they're having is going for a bunt. And the extreme right, if it takes over, they will really follow Donald Trump. And it is inevitable. This is my forecast. The It's my forecast. The extreme right is going to take over in the West. Let's see what happens. I will close now and say goodbye and God